today will be reacting to Peterbot, a Fortnite Pro.
Peterbot. Everyone thinks he's been cheating for years, but despite that has become one of the best players in the world. And his story has been extremely interesting to say the least. Peterbot started playing all the way back in Chapter 1 Season 2 on console, and just like every other kid, was just playing for fun. But it wouldn't take long for him to surpass the skill of everybody around him. Since Peterbot was so young, he didn't get the opportunity to compete until online tournaments began in February of 2019, where he would play in some division cups. Now most players who went on to become big pros competed in the World Cup, at least getting their first earnings around there. But interestingly enough, he would decide to not play any more tournaments. Now most players who went on to become big pros competed in the World Cup, at least getting their first earnings around there.
3 million. Yeah, 3 million. Yeah.
But interestingly enough, he would decide to not play any more tournaments after those Division Cups until Season X, completely skipping over the World Cup. His first events weren't the best, but when it came time to compete in FNCS, he played decently well. After this, he would bounce around from PC to console, playing pretty much every event he could, until eventually he made his first earnings in the console Winter Royale. This continued on for the next few months, but each tournament wouldn't be consistent at all. Sometimes he would place very highly, where other times he would do the complete opposite, barely making it in the top 10,000. But with that being said though, the inconsistency was only really on PC. On the other hand, on console, it seemed like he was slowly improving until eventually he made some money in his first ever solo platform cup. This proved to Peterbot that he had the potential to become really good, and even back then, he was an extremely good fighter, even though he wasn't fragging out as much as he does now. But little did he know down the road, this would be a blessing and a curse. He played FNCS on console, not seeing much success. And after this, he would completely stop playing on console altogether and make the official switch to PC, which later on would prove to be an extremely good decision. But at first, this was mainly because back then, he actually couldn't find a good sensitivity on controller, and he was having way more fun playing on keyboard and mouse. Now this change wasn't really out of nowhere, since beforehand he was playing on keyboard here and there to test it out. But once he saw how much better he could get from switching, he decided to make the plunge. And little did he know, this one decision would change his life forever. Season 5, his first official season fully making the switch, he would place in every single week of Frosty Frenzy, make a duo DreamHack finals, earn in a trio cash cup, and lastly place top 100 in almost every single session of FNCS, making his first ever semifinals. But since this was his first time, and he was contested off spawn, Peterbot wouldn't be able to make the grand finals, ending in 19th. Nonetheless, this was insane improvement. Going from barely placing top 1,000 to now earning consistently was very impressive. Now jumping in the next season, it would end up going pretty much the same as last one, but this time in the semifinals, he would end up being just 2 spots away from making the grand finals. Like I just said, this improvement was insane, but nobody could have prepared him for Season 7. By the way, if you're enjoying the video, make sure you're subscribed because only 7% of you watching actually are, so go double check. Just a few days after the season released, the solo FNCS All-Star Showdown would begin. But this event was a little weird. Now if you're familiar with competitive, you'll know that ping matters a lot, especially in solos. And if you use Gear Up, his ping would have decreased by a lot. Gear Up is a software that reroutes your connection to the most uncongested network, resulting in lower ping for any game in just one click. For example, when I tried it out myself, my ping went from around 65 to 45. Don't take my word for it, even top tier pros like Miro, Reed, and Asian Jeff use it in order to get that competitive edge during tournaments. Also, for those of you on console, don't worry, they have another option for you too with their game router called HyperEv. So if this sounds interesting to you, go check them out with the link in my description or in the pinned comment of this video. If you remember, in order to qualify, you needed to have placed decently well in the last 2 FNCS Grand Finals. And from there, the top 90 players would qualify. Then, in order to fill the remaining 10 spots, there was an entire separate open event, so anybody who hadn't yet qualified could play. And well, to make a long story short, Peter was playing some of the best Fortnite he ever played, eventually making it to the set lobby finals for that chance to make his first ever grand finals. And in the end, he would get 6, just barely making it by only 2 points. Now with most players in their first grand finals, you'd expect them to not do the best, especially considering this first was solos against the best players on NA East. But despite this, Peter would have one of the most impressive debut showings ever, finishing in 8th place, making himself $18,000. This was huge for him. Before this event, he was relatively unknown with around $4,000 earned. But this now showed everyone he had lots of potential. And because of this placement, going into that season's Trio FNCS, he would get the chance to play with Peterbot and TK, by far the best players he had ever trioed with. Not only was this really good on the competitive side of things, but also his social presence. Since he was playing with Peterbot, who was a very big streamer and averaged thousands of viewers, more people got to see how good he was. So with that, he would start posting on YouTube, and even though he never stayed consistent, started streaming on Twitch as well. This boost was so much in fact that he went from only around 4,000 followers across everything to around 100,000 in just a few months. Now I mentioned how much this boosted his socials, but how did this trio actually do when it came to tournaments? Well, they were insanely good. Up until this point, Peterbot still hadn't won a tournament yet, but after playing with them, he would win an FNCS qualifier round, a trio cash cup, a solo cash cup, and lastly, winning the FNCS semifinals, once again making it into the grand finals. Everything was looking amazing for him, but this is when all the accusations would start. Since he was in the spotlight now, more and more people were starting to watch his gameplay, and at times there were some sus clips. But this happens to a lot of people when they first start blowing up, so nothing was out of the ordinary quite yet. I mention this now though because, as I'm sure you know, these cheating accusations would never stop. And some of you might be surprised to hear this, but more casual viewers really hate him, especially because of his toxicity whenever he plays against other pros like Clix. But with that being said, him smack talking some of the best pros in the world also really helped him get his name out there. Not just because of what he said, but the fact that he was always there to back it up. Now all this wouldn't happen quite yet, but very soon he was about to get an extreme amount of hate after taking out one of the favorites in the FNCS Grand Finals. You see, at the time, Peter's trio was dropping at Craggy Cliffs, where they would be contested. But most games they wouldn't fight and decide to disengage, which meant their loot wasn't the best. So because of this, a good chunk of those games and grands, they would end up sneaking over to Steamy Stacks, which at the time was the home of Clix, Bucky, and Creo, who were being contested by a separate trio. Since they knew Clix's all-spawn battles would take him a while and leave them scuffed, Peter knew he could easily sweep in and finish them off. And this would end up happening several times. Unfortunately for him though, in that finals, they would have a very rough day 1. However, day 2 they were able to bring things back, finishing in 11th overall. You might be thinking that placement isn't too insane, but when you go and look at the bottom of the leaderboard, you'd find Clix's trio in dead last. So yeah, to say those fans weren't happy would be a massive understatement, considering they were a large reason for not making it off spawn. That being said though, in Season 8, a very interesting team change would happen, with Peterbot leaving Peterbot and TK to play with Bucky and Macwood. This was another massive teammate upgrade, so surely he would have a better placement than last time when he was conned, right? Well, no. They wouldn't play bad, but not as good as you would expect, with an uncontested Craggy Cliffs and an insane team, ending in 11th once again. This obviously wasn't the placement he wanted. However, he had another chance to prove himself, since just a few weeks later, the FNCS Grand Royale would begin. And instead of switching teammates last minute, he decided to give it another shot with them, which would pay off massively when they placed 4th. That concluded the end of Chapter 2, and nobody could have predicted the come-up he had. Just to put in perspective how much he had achieved in such a short amount of time, Peterbot went from having around $4,000 earned at the beginning of Season 7 to having over $60,000 earned at the end of Season 8. And little did everyone know, he was just getting started. Hopping into Chapter 3, the main game mode would permanently switch to duos. But with that change meant he needed to find a teammate. At first he would play with Kanata, and they performed very well, getting a 7th and winning one of the duo cash cups. But ultimately they would split, and after trying out with a few other pros, he landed on Quanti. It was also around now where Peterbot would really start to show off how insanely good he was at fighting. Everyone knew before he was good, but this season he would take it up a notch, casually dropping over 50 and sometimes over 70 kills during every single solo cash cup. And when it came time
Fortnite 2v2s. So yeah.
In the FNCS, him and Quanti would perform extremely well, making it to the semifinals. But after the first few games, they found themselves in an awful spot. This time around, you either needed a win or to come within the top 6 next most consistent teams in order to qualify for the grand finals. And when it came time to the final game, there was no physical way they could make it off of consistency. They needed to win. But then, during the mid-game, Quanti would go down, and all hope seemed lost. However, this is Peterbot we're talking about, and somehow he would go on to pull off one of the most insane solo clutches in Fortnite history, qualifying them to the grand finals after winning the game. Ultimately, in the end though, their performance was pretty good, considering FNCS was their first time playing together, finishing in 10th place. Yet this wasn't good enough for Peterbot, so going into Season 2, he would drop Quanti for Byla, who also first started getting his name out there back in the console days. But nobody could have expected this duo's dominance down the road. Just like with Quanti, their first time playing together was in the first qualifier of FNCS. Yet they made it look like they had been playing together for years, getting a 5th, 73rd, 4th, and 1st in the qualifier finals. This insane run meant in just that first week he had qualified for Grands. Now, even though they popped off then, nobody really knew how this duo would actually play in the finals, since, like I said, this was their first time playing, and in the 2 Cash Cups before Grands, they did mediocre. However, their drop spot was at the Collider, which, if you guys don't remember, was only in the season for a few weeks, and by far was the most broken POI. And Peterbot knew if he ever had a chance to prove everyone he wasn't just some kid who was only good at fighting, now was the time.
Hunter, you gotta get on this.
Wait, Dad, go.
Hunter. Dad.
Hi, hello.
Come on, 200.
Let me go. Dad.
Right?
Dad.
Go. Turn back.
Bring it down, you gotta die.
Oh.
Let's go, bro. We're so good, though. There's that all day. Nice, Peter. Great game. See that going. Nice, Peter. Nice. Bro. Wait.
Dad.
Huh?
Back. Dad.
We're so good, bro.
With the shock of many, Peterbot and Byla would come out with the win, cementing himself in Fortnite history. But after this, his placements in FNCS would only start to decrease. In Season 3, he and Byla would perform super well with the 6th, but Peterbot was not happy with it because if you look closer, on day 1, they were in 1st. Then for whatever reason on day 2, they completely slipped up, ending in 23rd that day. Everything still seemed to be good though, and with the announcement that FNCS that next season would be an invitational, which was also the first LAN since the World Cup, everybody was hyped. However, for some reason, Byla didn't want to go, and since they were obviously invited after winning, he needed a new duo. And this time would pick Jamper, but this season wouldn't go so well for him. I mentioned earlier how he was getting cheating accusations in Chapter 2 and the beginning of Chapter 3 when he started dropping higher kill games. Well, as you can imagine, the better Peterbot would place, the more he would get accused, even having massive pros thinking he was cheating. And Peter wouldn't help himself out either, considering he was rarely streaming on Twitch and was still posting just a few videos each season. On top of all of that, you had clips like these, which made it really hard to not believe all these accusations.
What?
Wait, did I say
Peter!
Wait.
You were making it obvious, on God!
But like I just mentioned, this season was a LAN event, the only real way to prove once and for all he wasn't hacking. However, the opposite would happen. After day 1, he found himself in dead last. Day 2, they were able to bring it back a little, doing slightly better, but in the end, they would place 32nd. This was not the ending to the chapter he had expected, but all he could do for now was look forward. And at the start of Chapter 4, he would have an amazing opportunity. The World Cup champion himself, Booga, hit him up to play, and this duo was looking like the easy favorites to win. But when it came time to play in Grands, they'd finish in 16th, which was a big upset to everybody. In the season after, he would decide to run it back with Quanti, where their placement improved, getting a 9th while being contested, which was quite impressive, but still, Peterbot wasn't happy with this performance. So he would once again switch teammates, going into Season 3, this time playing with Larson. Yet once again, in the FNCS finals, he'd get contested, resulting in an 18th. Chapter 4 so far wasn't going as well as he had hoped, and something I haven't mentioned yet was for Season 4 FNCS, it was actually the Global Championship, and in order to qualify, you needed to place highly in the Grand Finals, which he wasn't able to do. However, there was still one last opportunity for him to qualify in the Last Chance Major, where he needed to get a top 8 in finals. And interestingly enough, for this, he would decide to run it back with Byla. This team was by far the favorite to qualify, so to make a long story short, they ended up dominating the tournament, winning it by over 200 points. So yeah, it wasn't even close. But when it came time to play at the LAN finals, once again, he would end up being contested, resulting in a 26th place. After riding off the high of Chapter 3, Chapter 4 was a big letdown for Peterbot. But with that being said, jumping into Chapter 5, he was more motivated than ever. Up until this point, Peterbot was playing with large names who had been known in the scene for years. But in Season 1 of this new chapter, he would make a very interesting switch. I've said countless times how he is one of the best fighters, and even then, he decided to play with another phenomenal fighter, who is Pollo. Now, to the average viewer, you may not have heard of him, but to those who have been watching closely, they know Pollo is easily one of the best up-and-coming players out there. However, like I said, both these players are extremely good fighters, so does that mean they have the brains to do well? Before we could really test this out though, Peterbot and Pollo were making history by dropping multiple 30+ kill games in the Solo Victory Cup finals. Peterbot being just a few kills off of 40 countless times. Now, I mentioned him being accused of cheating over and over again, but the majority of this was in Chapter 3, and since then, the competitive Fortnite player base and viewership has gone up drastically, so there are many new eyes on Peterbot who have never seen him before. So obviously, those cheating accusations came up once again, but this time, Peter actually started streaming some events and posting them to YouTube much more, which would skyrocket his popularity to now having almost 500,000 followers on Twitch, streaming to thousands of viewers, and gaining almost 300,000 subs on YouTube. Peterbot was now easily in his prime. He couldn't have been looking better. And in the duo cash cups leading up to FNCS, they performed extremely well with a 7th, 1st, and 4th. On top of that, when it came time to those FNCS qualifiers, they ended up being one of the most consistent teams in the world, getting 2 second places. Now it was finally time for the grand finals, and after not being able to prove himself for the last year, Peterbot needed redemption. So it was now where we could finally see if he was truly in his prime. And well, that's exactly what he did. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to get the win, but they still ended up getting 2nd place. Extremely impressive. We're now in Season 2, and Peter is still looking insane. Just recently breaking the Solo Victory Cup world record by getting 41 kills, winning the very first duo cash cup of the season, then in the next one, winning not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, but 5 out of the 6 games in finals. On top of all this, he alphaed up Grim Gates from the FNCS winners Golden Acorn, which by far has the most broken medallion we've ever seen. Because of this, we even have other Tier 1 pros saying there's no way he doesn't win FNCS this season. With that being said though, it does look like he might end up getting contested this season. However, in the most recent duo cash cup when they were contested, they still ended up winning, getting 3 wins, so it still looks very likely they'll come through on top. So for now, all we can really do is wait to see what happens. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure to drop a like and subscribe. Check out my new map, Tile Wars, and I hope you all have an amazing rest of your days.
Okay.
Peace out.
So guys, I hope you guys enjoyed the video and make sure to like and subscribe.